Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Fahrbach. After weeks of escalating rhetoric, President Trump's decision to rule out force over Greenland has been welcomed by allies as a step back from the brink. The president has now scrapped his punitive sanctions idea against several EU states due to take effect February 1st, and markets are already rising at the news. Still, the episode in Davos on Wednesday has exposed underlying tensions over burden sharing, strategic interests in the Arctic, and how disputes between NATO partners are now being conducted in public. To talk about it further, we're now joined by Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies, University College Dublin. Good to have you back on TVP World.
Thank you so much for having me here, Sasha.
The speech from President Trump, there's a lot to break down, but I do want to just go with the bigger narrative here. We're once again on the brink. Trump's maximalist demands. Is this now a de-escalation? Is this yet another tactic? And how do we deal with this kind of diplomacy, if we can call it that?
Well, the speech has been overtaken because Trump bailed out on the threat to seize Greenland. As you noted, during the speech, he indicated, okay, I'm not going to invade the island. But then a few hours later, we get this sudden, withdrawal of this threat to impose 15% tariffs on 8 European countries on February 1st. 10% on February 1st, and then raising it to 25% at the start of June, unless he got Greenland. And so the question that, you worked through this morning, beyond the chaos, the rambling, the lies in that speech is, why did he bail when he and his officials had been insisting going into Davos that they were going to get Greenland? And I think the fundamental, Sasha, I can walk you through it, is that it was kind of a repeat of what happened in April of last year after his so-called Liberation Day on tariffs. He bailed out because officials went to him and said, this is having economic shockwaves that are affecting U.S. interest, including the stock market, and I suspect including the bond market. And Trump, first and foremost, thinks as a businessman, and he got the jitters over that.
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious, there's many avenues to this. I want to talk about this particular framework that he's mentioned, as you said last night. We don't have too many details of it, but at the same time, I just want to read some of the quotes from President Trump. As I quote here, it's a deal that everybody is very happy with. It's a long-term deal. It's the ultimate long-term deal. It puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and to minerals. So again, we have to dissect this a little bit. He stepped back from this. We have this. What could it entail in some kind of form? Was this always bluster? Is this something else? And how about the tactics, how we got here? What's the collateral damage because of all this?
Yeah, let's start off with the fact that he's covering his retreat. Officials, after he announced that he was backing off of the tariffs, and I suspect they were American officials, said, that NATO has put out a proposal which would give the Americans sovereignty over their military bases. They only have one, but if they had more sovereignty over their military bases in Greenland. Now, the U.S. already has a great deal of autonomy and jurisdiction over its military bases, but this would give Trump the face saver of, this is American territory. But NATO officials made clear that in their statements, NATO officials did not refer to any such proposal. And Danish and Greenlander officials made clear that NATO has no authority to discuss sovereignty with the Americans. So I think this is a little bit of, as I said, sort of face-saving window dressing. Now, in terms of how we got here, I have said throughout this week that the Trump officials, and I'm talking about Vice President J.D. Vance, I'm talking about Trump's advisor, Stephen Miller. They have this habit of being like a dog chasing a car. Yap, 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 bark, bark, bark. And then when they get to the car, they're not sure what to do with it. This happened with Venezuela, where they had to back off removing the Maduro regime, even if they kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. And then with Greenland, they had waved this fist. All options are on the table. We could do this. As late as Tuesday, officials in Davos, like Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying we will take this area. But how? How are they going to do it? They weren't going to send in military forces. And the idea of escalating the tariffs even further was being pushed back by, the downturn in the stock markets. And I will repeat, what's the one thing that Donald Trump looks at every morning, even before he looks at stuff he can take? It's the state of the U.S. stock market.
Mm-hmm. And also, I want to come back to a little bit more. You mentioned NATO. This is also one of the lines you've said, not just yesterday, but this narrative of constantly saying that he's saved NATO, that NATO has never done anything for the United States. That's not the first time he said it. And I think I'm just curious about your opinion, because that's also not true, is it? If we look at Article 5, that was triggered in 2001 for the first time ever in its history. Also, Danish troop losses in Afghanistan, I believe around 44. That's one of the highest per capita. Poland as well, I think 43 losses. NATO losses abound. So how dangerous is that kind of rhetoric? As you say, he stepped back, but he's still said these things. How lasting is that kind of damage?
Look, the whole series of falsehoods that have been put out for weeks by Trump and his acolytes as they try to seize Greenland, it's just frankly offensive. The idea that Denmark does nothing to protect Greenland's security, when of course Denmark has a treaty since 1951, since the United States, and the Danes have just committed more than 5 billion euros to Nordic defense, along with Nordic partners. The idea that, as you mentioned, that NATO just simply has been free riding off of the United States, when the only time that Article 5 was invoked was after 9/11, and the U.S. asked for NATO's help. And then that really offensive fact that NATO members, including Denmark, which suffered the third largest losses per capita, and Poland, they sacrificed, in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Okay, but let's put it all in wider context. Why is this all going on? Even if we have avoided an immediate crisis with the tariffs, there's a wider one, which is that Trump and his officials, and I do mean Vice President J.D. Vance, I do mean the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, I do mean Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, they do not believe in a U.S.-European alliance. They see Europe as an adversary. They see it as an economic adversary. They see it as a political adversary. They have made clear in their national security strategy they want to break up the European Union. They want to deal with individual European countries led by hard right parties. That's what they want, and they will not give up on that quest, even if they've suffered an immediate defeat over Greenland.
Mm-hmm. That's also something that's happening in the course of the day. It will be that emergency meeting of all EU member states leaders. We were already talking about this trade bazooka yesterday, the so-called trade bazooka, measures to protect Europe. The U.S.-EU trade deal now in doubt. What's next with this alliance, this Transatlantic alliance, which seems to be in very, very bumpy waters?
Yeah, on the economic front, what we were looking at before yesterday is that Trump was going to impose the first 10% of the tariffs on those 8 European countries on February 1st. And then within a week, the EU waiver on its reciprocal tariffs from last summer. Remember, the Americans had imposed 15% tariffs. That waiver expires. So the EU already had an immediate decision whether to extend the waiver or whether to impose the tariffs on 93 billion euros of U.S. products. But beyond that, you mentioned the anti-coercion instrument, which would go much farther, also with restrictions on U.S. services, potentially on foreign investment. And you take the whole combination of that, and the markets, both stock and bond, were looking ahead that we were going to have this critical point in early February. Now, I do think the EU will now hold off. I think they'll probably hold off even on the reciprocal tariffs. They'll be satisfied we are, where we are for the moment. But if you look down the road, at any point, not just because Trump is simply a person who I think is erratic, in fact, I would say is in declining mental health, but because you have those officials who will want to punish Europe, we could have a flare-up of the economic confrontation again. What is saving Europe right now from a complete meltdown of the alliance are two things. One is that at working level, you've got career officials in NATO, in the Pentagon, in State Department, in the intelligence services, whose careers have been based on cooperation with Europe, including Poland. And secondly, the fact that the Americans, despite having one of the most powerful economies in the world, do not run the global economy. They are not immune from it. And economics is speaking this week much louder even than Trump's bluster.
Mm-hmm. One thing that also was overshadowed a bit as well, especially these last few days, was Ukraine. I mean, that is something that definitely matters also very much to the Europeans as well. We're hearing through various outlets that President Zelensky is going to be in Davos today, on Thursday, and he's going to very likely meet with President Donald Trump. Witkoff on his way with Jared Kushner to Moscow as well. Where is this going? I mean, we've had so much attention on this threat in terms of Greenland. What do you expect will happen, if anything, now with Ukraine?
Yeah, again, here's the key context here. We have had two competing approaches to Ukraine since late October. In late October, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, those same envoys that will be seeing Vladimir Putin today, they worked with Putin's top advisor, Kirill Dmitriev, on a 28-point ultimatum for Ukraine to give up territory, especially all of the Donetsk region in the east of the country, to keep Ukraine weak with no meaningful security guarantees, no significant Western military assistance. In effect, Russian de facto control over almost all of the country. Ukraine and Europe have spent most of the next 3 months pushing back that ultimatum with proposals, which include security guarantees with U.S. participation, which include a procedure for Ukrainian recovery, and which propose a demilitarized free economic zone over the Donetsk region. Now, we've got these two different meetings today. Zelensky going to see Trump, having said he would not go to Davos unless there was meaningful discussion on all these points I've just mentioned. And then you've got the envoys in the Kremlin. Which proposal has the higher ground? The Ukraine-Europe proposal, where you had gotten U.S. buy-in from officials in talks in Berlin, in Paris, and in Miami, or is it the Kremlin's ultimatum that comes back to the fore? And what was significant about all the statements yesterday, about all the meetings, is that there were no details given on where we are on the Ukraine-Europe proposal or on that Kremlin ultimatum.
Just super short here, a quick one. How much does this board of peace of Trump factor in all this? Because, I mean, this is something that he's also been highlighting, especially these last few days.
Oh, it's going to be used as a device to spin Trump. So Vladimir Putin will say today, I'm going to accept your invitation to join the Board of Peace for Gaza, and I will contribute $1 billion in Russian frozen assets that are held in the United States to your Board of Peace. Of course, it's not up to Putin what he does with the Russian frozen assets that are held in the United States, but he'll try to spend Trump's ego by saying, yeah, look, here's a little bit of shiny money for you, and thank you for letting me be. Oh, by the way, an indicted, someone who's wanted for arrest by the International Criminal Court for deporting Ukrainian children. Yeah, thank you for letting me be on your Board of Peace in Gaza.
All right. So many different narratives, and we'll obviously be covering all that. Look, always a pleasure. Thanks for all that. Professor Scott Lucas there. Much appreciated. Thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here for more news and commentary on TVP World. Goodbye.